During what should have been the most joyous moment of Marcus Torini's life, Pope Leo XIV appeared unannounced at his wedding ceremony, immediately sensing something was terribly wrong with the groom. What happened next would shock everyone in St. Peter's Basilica and change two lives forever. Marcus stood at the altar of the magnificent basilica, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his white bow tie for the third time in 5 minutes. Sunlight streamed through the ancient stained glass windows, casting ethereal patterns across the marble floor, where Sophia would soon walk toward him. After 4 years of courtship and months of meticulous planning, this moment felt almost surreal. The 28-year-old archivist had dreamed of this day since their first kiss in the Vatican gardens. Yet something gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, a shadow he had worked desperately to suppress. Sophia Benedetti appeared at the basilica's entrance like a vision in ivory silk, her grandmother's pearl necklace catching the light as she moved. Her dark eyes sparkled with pure happiness, radiating the kind of joy that made everyone in the small gathering of family and friends smile. Instinctively, she had waited patiently through Marcus's demanding work schedule at the Vatican's secret archives, understanding his passion for preserving history even when it meant cancelled dinners and postponed weekend trips. The ceremony had been arranged. Through Marcus's connections within the Vatican, a privilege afforded to long-serving employees. Cardinal Torretti, a family friend, was scheduled to officiate in the intimate chapel they had reserved. Everything was proceeding according to their carefully crafted plans when the massive doors at the back of the basilica suddenly opened with a resonant echo. A hush fell over the congregation as a figure in simple white robes entered, moving with deliberate grace despite his advanced age. Pope Leo XIV, at 79 years old, walked slowly but purposefully down the aisle, his penetrating blue eyes scanning the gathering before settling on Marcus with an intensity that made the groom's breath catch in his throat. "Your Holiness," Cardinal Torretti stammered, immediately bowing deeply. The wedding guests followed suit, creating a wave of reverence that rippled through the basilica, but Pope Leo XIV's attention remained fixed on Marcus, studying him with the kind of perceptive gaze that seemed to see straight through to the soul. Marcus felt his carefully constructed composure beginning to crack under that unwavering scrutiny, his secret burden suddenly feeling heavier than ever before. 3 weeks earlier, Pope Leo XIV had collapsed in his private study while reviewing correspondence from bishops worldwide. The 79-year-old pontiff had been pushing himself relentlessly despite his physician's warnings about his deteriorating heart condition. Dr. Castellani had been adamant during their last consultation. Complete rest, reduced schedule, no unexpected exertions. Yet here he was, defying medical orders once again because something deeper than physical ailment compelled him forward. The Holy Father had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense spiritual turmoil in others, a gift that had guided his pastoral care throughout his papacy. That morning, while reviewing routine Vatican personnel files, Marcus Torini's photograph had caught his attention in an inexplicable way. The young archivist's eyes seemed to carry a weight that troubled the Pope's spirit, stirring something within him that he couldn't dismiss as mere curiosity. Cardinal Torretti had tried to dissuade him from attending the wedding. "Your Holiness, you need rest. The ceremony is a small affair, hardly requiring papal presence," the cardinal had argued, genuine concern evident in his weathered features. But Pope Leo XIV had felt an unmistakable calling, the kind of spiritual prompting that had guided his most important decisions throughout his tenure. Now, standing in the basilica, Pope Leo XIV felt vindicated in his instincts. Marcus Torini stood frozen at the altar, his face draining of color as their eyes met. The Pope had officiated countless weddings during his years of service, blessing unions built on love and trust. But something was fundamentally wrong here. something that made his pastoral heart ache with concern. Cardinal Toretti, Pope Leo XIV said quietly, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had defined his papacy. "I believe the Holy Spirit has brought me here for a reason." The cardinal nodded respectfully, though confusion flickered across his features. The wedding guests remained in various states of reverence, unsure whether to continue standing or resume their seats. Sophia looked between her groom and the unexpected papal visitor, her joy beginning to mix with bewilderment. Marcus felt sweat gathering at his temples, despite the basilica's cool temperature. The secret he had carried for months suddenly felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest. Pope Leo XIV's reputation for spiritual discernment was legendary within Vatican circles, and Marcus realized with growing dread that his carefully hidden guilt might not remain concealed much longer. The Holy Father stepped closer to the altar, his movements deliberate and purposeful despite his frail appearance. Marcus's carefully rehearsed composure began to fracture under the weight of Pope Leo XIV's unwavering gaze. The young archivist had spent months perfecting his wedding day demeanor, practicing his vows in the mirror until they flowed effortlessly, preparing for every possible scenario except this one. His hands, which had been steady while handling priceless manuscripts in the Vatican archives, now trembled as he reached for Sophia's fingers. Sophia noticed immediately. After 4 years together, she could read Marcus's moods like the ancient texts he studied so passionately. The way his jaw tightened when he was stressed, how his left eye twitched almost imperceptibly when he was keeping something from her. Today, both signs were present in alarming intensity. "Marcus," she whispered, squeezing his hand gently. "Are you all right?" He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just overwhelmed by the honor of His Holiness's presence," he managed, though his voice carried an undertone of strain that made Sophia's brow furrow with concern. The wedding guests, still standing in respectful attention for Pope Leo XIV, began to shift uncomfortably. Marcus's mother, Elena Torini, watched her son with growing worry. She had raised him to be honest above all else, instilling values that had served him well throughout his academic career and Vatican service. The young man standing at the altar, however, bore little resemblance to the confident son she knew. Pope Leo XIV remained silent, his penetrating blue eyes never leaving Marcus's face. The Holy Father had witnessed this particular type of spiritual anguish before, the telltale signs of a soul carrying unconfessed burdens. Guilt had its own unmistakable signature, a heaviness that seemed to bend the very air around those who bore it. Marcus felt exposed under that papal scrutiny, as if Pope Leo XIV could see directly into the locked chambers of his conscience where his secret festered like an infected wound. The document he had altered, the signatures he had forged, the money he had accepted, all of it seemed to flash before his eyes in vivid, condemning detail. "Perhaps," Marcus said suddenly, his voice cracking slightly, "we should begin the ceremony." He looked desperately at Cardinal Toretti, seeking some reprieve from the mounting tension, but Pope Leo XIV stepped forward instead, his frail form seeming to command the entire basilica's attention. When he spoke, his words carried the quiet authority of decades spent shepherding souls through their darkest moments. "My son," he said softly, the words echoing off the ancient marble walls, "there is something troubling your heart." Pope Leo XIV's eyes, normally twinkling with paternal warmth, grew sharp and focused as he studied Marcus's face with the intensity of a master craftsman examining a flawed gemstone. The Holy Father had spent decades reading souls, deciphering the subtle languages of guilt and redemption written in human expressions. What he saw in the young groom's features made his pastoral heart quicken with concern. Marcus felt stripped bare under that penetrating gaze, as if Pope Leo XIV could see through the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for months. The sweat that had begun gathering at his temples now trickled down his neck, dampening the collar of his pristine white shirt. His breathing became shallow, rapid, the kind of panicked rhythm that preceded either confession or collapse. "Your Holiness," Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I assure you that everything is—" "No," Pope Leo XIV interrupted gently, raising one weathered hand. The simple gesture carried such authority that it silenced not only Marcus, but the entire congregation. "There is fear in your eyes, my son. Fear that has nothing to do with wedding nerves or the honor of my unexpected presence." Sophia's grip on Marcus's hand tightened as she felt him trembling. She had never seen him like this, not even during his most stressful periods at the archives, when manuscript deadlines loomed, or when he had to present research findings to senior Vatican officials. This was different, deeper, the kind of fear that came from dark places she had never known existed in the man she loved. The basilica fell into an almost sacred silence, the kind that seemed to press against the ancient walls and demand truth. Wedding guests exchanged nervous glances, sensing something profound was unfolding before them. Cardinal Terretti stood frozen, uncertain whether to intervene or trust in Pope Leo XIV's legendary wisdom. Pope Leo XIV stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that his next words reached only the couple and those nearest to the altar. His voice carried the gentle firmness of a father addressing a beloved child caught in wrongdoing. "I see the weight you carry," he said, his blue eyes never wavering from Marcus's increasingly pale face. "It bends your shoulders and clouds your joy on what should be the happiest day of your life. This burden you bear, it stands between you and the sacred vows you wish to exchange." Marcus's composure finally cracked. A single tear escaped down his cheek as he realized that his secret was no longer his to keep. The moment arrived when Cardinal Terretti, sensing the need to restore some semblance of normalcy to the ceremony, stepped forward with his prayer book. His weathered hands found the familiar pages as he prepared to begin the traditional wedding liturgy, the ancient words that had united countless couples within these sacred walls. The congregation seemed to exhale collectively, grateful for this return to expected ritual. "Dearly beloved," Cardinal Terretti began, his voice echoing through the basilica's vaulted spaces, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God to witness and bless the union of Marcus and Sophia in holy matrimony." But before he could continue, Pope Leo XIV raised his hand with unmistakable authority. "Fermatevi," the Holy Father said, his voice cutting through the sacred space like a blade through silk. The single Italian word carried such commanding power that it seemed to freeze time itself. "Stop." The word hung in the air, gentle yet absolute, resonating off the ancient marble columns and settling into the stunned silence that followed. Cardinal Terretti's prayer book trembled in his hands as he looked up in shock. Never in his 40 years of officiating ceremonies had he witnessed such a dramatic papal intervention. Sophia's bouquet of white roses slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, the delicate petals scattering across the marble floor like fallen snow. Her dark eyes darted between Pope Leo XIV and Marcus, confusion and growing alarm written across her beautiful features. The joy that had radiated from her only moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that seemed to seep into her very bones. Marcus stood frozen, his face now completely drained of color. The tear that had escaped earlier was joined by others, creating silent streams down his cheeks. His carefully pressed wedding suit suddenly felt like a costume he had no right to wear, the white bow tie around his throat seeming to tighten with each labored breath. The wedding guests sat in collective shock, some half rising from their seats. Before thinking better of it, Marcus's mother pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with maternal fear. Sophia's family exchanged bewildered glances, their festive anticipation transforming into concerned whispers that barely dared to break the oppressive silence. Pope Leo XIV's penetrating gaze remained fixed on Marcus, reading the guilt written in every line of the young man's face. The Holy Father had seen this expression countless times during private confessions, the look of a soul desperate to unburden itself, yet terrified of the consequences. "My son," Pope Leo XIV said softly, his words carrying to every corner of the basilica. "Before these sacred vows can be exchanged, there is something that must be spoken." Pope Leo XIV stepped closer to Marcus, his frail form moving with surprising grace across the marble floor. The Holy Father's blue eyes, weathered by decades of witnessing human suffering and redemption, held neither judgment nor condemnation, only a profound compassion that seemed to reach directly into Marcus's tormented soul. "Marcus," the Pope said, gently, his voice low enough that only those closest to the altar could hear clearly. "I see hesitation in your eyes, not the nervous excitement of a groom about to pledge his life to his beloved, but something deeper, something that troubles your spirit on what should be the most joyful day of your life." Marcus felt his knees weaken under the weight of that gentle scrutiny. The secret he had carried for months pressed against his chest like a physical burden, making each breath a struggle. He glanced desperately at Sophia, whose confused expression only deepened his anguish. How could he explain to this pure, trusting woman that the man she was about to marry was a fraud? "Your Holiness," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with emotion, I don't know what you mean." But Pope Leo XIV's knowing expression suggested otherwise. The Holy Father had spent his entire papacy shepherding souls through their darkest moments, and he recognized the telltale signs of unconfessed guilt. The way Marcus's hands trembled, the shallow breathing, the inability to meet his beloved's eyes directly, all spoke of a conscience in torment. "My son," Pope Leo XIV continued, his tone remaining gentle but insistent, "marriage is a sacrament, built upon the foundation of truth and trust. Any deception, no matter how well-intentioned, creates cracks in that foundation that will only widen with time." Sophia reached for Marcus's hand, her touch both comforting and questioning. "Marcus, what is he talking about? What's wrong?" Her voice carried a note of fear that she was trying desperately to suppress, but the confusion in her dark eyes was impossible to hide. The congregation watched in stunned silence as this intimate drama unfolded before them. Wedding guests who had come expecting celebration now found themselves witnesses to something far more profound and unsettling. Cardinal Terretti stood motionless, his prayer book still open to the marriage ceremony, uncertain whether to intervene or trust in Pope Leo XIV's spiritual wisdom. Marcus looked between the woman he loved and the Holy Father, who seemed to see straight through to his guilty soul. The moment of reckoning he had dreaded for months was finally upon him. "You haven't told her," Pope Leo XIV said, not as a question, but as a statement of profound understanding. The words Pope Leo XIV had spoken hung in the sacred air like an accusation that couldn't be denied. Marcus felt the last vestiges of his carefully constructed facade crumbling away, leaving him exposed and vulnerable before the woman he loved and the congregation who had come to celebrate their union. His shoulders sagged under the weight of months of deception, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Your Holiness," Marcus began, his words trembling with the effort of forcing them past his lips. "You are right." A collective intake of breath rippled through the basilica. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The bouquet she had dropped earlier lay forgotten at her feet, its white roses now seeming to mock the purity she had believed defined their relationship. Marcus turned to face Sophia directly, taking both her hands in his despite their trembling. "My love," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "I've been keeping something from you, something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was too afraid, too ashamed." Sophia's dark eyes searched his face desperately, looking for some sign that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. "What are you talking about, Marcus? What could be so terrible that you couldn't tell me?" The wedding guests sat frozen in their seats, some leaning forward unconsciously, as if drawn by the magnetic pull of unfolding drama. Marcus's mother, Elena, pressed her handkerchief to her lips, her maternal instinct screaming that her son was about to reveal something that would change everything. Sophia's family exchanged worried glances, their festive anticipation replaced by a growing sense of dread. Pope Leo XIV watched the exchange with the patient wisdom of a shepherd who understood that healing could only begin with the acknowledgement of wounds. His presence seemed to create a sacred space where truth could finally emerge from the shadows where it had been hidden. "I've done something," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength even as tears continued to flow down his cheeks. "Something that goes against everything I believed about myself, everything you believe about me. I've compromised my integrity in a way that makes me question whether I'm worthy of your love." Sophia's grip on his hands tightened, her knuckles white with the intensity of her hold. "Tell me," she whispered, though fear was clearly evident in her voice. "Whatever it is, just tell me." Marcus looked once more at Pope Leo XIV, who nodded with gentle encouragement, then back to the woman whose trust he was about to shatter. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, gathering the courage to speak words that would irrevocably change everything. When he opened them again, the pain in his expression was so raw that Sophia instinctively stepped closer, despite her growing fear of what she was about to hear. "6 months ago," Marcus began, his voice steady now with the terrible clarity that comes with confession, "I was approached by a private collector named Signor Castellano. He offered me €50,000 to authenticate a series of 16th century papal documents he claimed to have inherited from his family." A murmur of shock rippled through the congregation. €50,000 was more than Marcus earned in 2 years at the Vatican archives. Sophia's face went pale as she began to understand the magnitude of what her fiancé was revealing. "The documents were forgeries," Marcus continued, his words falling like stones into the silence. "Expert forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. I knew it the moment I examined them under magnification. The ink composition was wrong, the parchment artificially aged, the papal seals masterfully crafted but lacking the microscopic details that only genuine documents possess." Pope Leo XIV listened with the grave attention of a confessor, his weathered face reflecting both sorrow and understanding. He had seen the corrupting power of money destroy good souls before, watched as financial desperation led decent people down paths they never imagined they would walk. "I should have reported them immediately," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "That was my duty, my sacred responsibility as a guardian of church history. But Castellano knew about my mother's medical bills, knew that I was drowning in debt trying to pay for her cancer treatments." Elena Torini gasped audibly from her seat, her hand flying to her throat as she realized her son's sacrifice had led to his moral downfall. The cancer that had ravaged her body for months had apparently also ravaged her son's conscience. "So, I authenticated them," Marcus whispered, the admission seeming to physically pain him. "I wrote official Vatican archive documentation declaring them genuine. Castellano sold them to a private museum for over €2 million, and I received my payment for services rendered." Sophia staggered backward as if physically struck, her hands dropping from Marcus's as the full scope of his betrayal became clear. The man she loved, the scholar she had admired for his integrity and dedication to preserving truth, had sold his soul for money. Marcus, she breathed, her voice barely audible. You forged Vatican documents? You betrayed everything you claim. To believe in, the question hung between them like a chasm that might never be bridged. Sophia stood motionless at the altar, her ivory wedding dress suddenly feeling like a mockery of the purity she had believed their love represented. The man before her, the scholar she had fallen in love with during late nights in the Vatican library, the devoted son who worked tirelessly to preserve history's most sacred documents, had revealed himself to be someone she didn't recognize at all. 2 million euros, she repeated slowly, her voice hollow with disbelief. You helped someone steal 2 million euros by lying about church documents. Her dark eyes, which had sparkled with joy only minutes earlier, now reflected a pain so deep it seemed to echo through the basilica's ancient stones. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the bride they had come to celebrate processed the devastating revelation. Sophia's father, a devout man who had taught her to revere the Church's teachings above all else, sat with his head in his hands. Her mother clutched her rosary so tightly her knuckles had turned white, whispering prayers for guidance in a situation no parent could have imagined. "Sophia, please!" Marcus reached for her hands, but she pulled away as if his touch might contaminate her. "I was desperate. My mother was dying, and I couldn't afford the treatments she needed. I told myself it was just once, that no one would be hurt by some old documents changing hands." "Just once?" Sophia's voice rose for the first time, carrying a note of incredulous anger that made several guests flinch. "Marcus, you didn't just lie to some collector. You lied to the Vatican, to the Church, to me. You betrayed everything we both claimed to hold sacred." Pope Leo XIV observed the exchange with the patience of someone who had witnessed countless souls grapple with the consequences of moral failure. The Holy Father understood that Sophia's reaction was not just about the money or even the forgery. It was about trust, the fundamental foundation upon which all meaningful relationships were built. "How long have you been lying to me?" Sophia asked, her voice breaking. "When you came home late from work, when you said you were researching manuscripts, were you actually meeting with criminals? When you bought me that expensive necklace for my birthday, was that paid for with blood money?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. The small diamond pendant that had sparkled around Sophia's neck on countless occasions suddenly felt like a chain of betrayal, weighing her down with the knowledge that their entire relationship had been built on deception. "I don't know who you are," Sophia whispered, her words cutting deeper than any shout could have. Marcus fell to his knees on the cold marble floor, his formal wedding attire a stark contrast to his posture of complete supplication. The proud scholar who had walked confidently down the aisle was gone, replaced by a broken man seeking redemption in the most sacred of spaces. His voice, when he spoke again, carried the weight of genuine repentance. "Sophia, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," he said, his words echoing through the basilica's vaulted ceiling. "But I need you to know that I haven't been able to sleep, haven't been able to look at myself in the mirror since the moment I signed those false documents. The guilt has been eating me alive." Pope Leo XIV stepped closer, his weathered hand coming to rest gently on Marcus's shoulder. The Holy Father had seen this moment countless times throughout his papacy, the instant when a soul finally surrendered its burden of guilt and sought the path back to grace. "Tell her about your decision, my son," Pope Leo XIV said softly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a shepherd guiding his flock. "Tell her about the choice you made 3 weeks ago." Marcus looked up at Sophia through tear-filled eyes, drawing strength from the Pope's presence. "I've arranged to join Father Benedetti's restoration mission in Syria," he said, his voice gaining clarity as he spoke. "They're working to rebuild churches and preserve ancient Christian manuscripts that were damaged during the conflict. It's a 2-year commitment, A collective gasp arose from the wedding guests. Sophia's hand flew to her throat, her eyes widening with shock and something that might have been hope. The Syria mission was legendary within Vatican circles for its dangerous conditions and the complete dedication it required from its volunteers. "I've already resigned from the Vatican archives," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I've donated every euro I received from Castellano to the families displaced by the war. It won't undo what I did, but it's a beginning. Father Benedetti says they need someone with my expertise to help catalogue and preserve the manuscripts they recover from the ruins." Sophia stared at him in stunned silence, processing this revelation that changed everything she thought she understood about the man before her. The Syria mission was not a comfortable penance, but a genuine sacrifice that would require him to risk his life in service of others. 2 years, she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You planned to leave for 2 years without telling me. Until now." Marcus's shoulders trembled as he faced the full weight of his intended sacrifice and what it would cost them both. Sophia looked down at Marcus kneeling before her, his face streaked with tears and raw with the vulnerability of complete honesty. The basilica fell into profound silence as everyone present held their breath, waiting to see whether love could survive such a devastating revelation. The scattered rose petals from her bouquet lay between them like fallen promises, beautiful but broken. For long moments, Sophia said nothing. Her mind raced through 4 years of memories, re-examining every conversation, every gesture, every moment of tenderness in light of what she now knew. The late nights when Marcus had seemed troubled, the times he'd insisted on paying for expensive dinners despite his modest salary, the way he'd sometimes stared into space with haunted eyes. "You were going to leave," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were going to let me marry you today and then disappear to Syria for 2 years without ever telling me why." Marcus nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I thought, if I could somehow atone for what I'd done, if I could find a way to make amends, then maybe I could come back worthy of your love. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you would see me as I really am." "And how is that?" Sophia asked, kneeling down to meet him at his level, her wedding dress pooling around her like clouds. "A coward," Marcus whispered. "A man who betrayed everything he claimed to believe in for money. Someone who doesn't deserve the love of someone as pure and good as you." Pope Leo XIV watched this exchange with the knowing eyes of someone who had witnessed countless moments of human redemption. The Holy Father understood that this was the crucial moment, when love would either triumph over betrayal or be destroyed by it. Sophia reached out slowly, her trembling fingers touching Marcus's tear-stained cheek. When she spoke, her voice carried a strength that surprised even herself. "Marcus," she said softly, "the man I fell in love with isn't perfect. He's someone who makes mistakes, who feels desperate enough to compromise his values, who carries guilt so heavy it nearly destroys him. But he's also someone brave enough to confess his sins in front of God and everyone who matters to him, someone willing to sacrifice 2 years of his life to make amends." Marcus looked up at her in wonder, hardly daring to hope. "The question isn't whether you deserve my love," Sophia continued, tears now flowing freely down her own cheeks. "The question is whether you're ready to accept it." Pope Leo XIV stepped forward, his frail hands helping both Marcus and Sophia to their feet. The Holy Father's eyes sparkled with the joy of a shepherd who had witnessed his flock find their way back to grace through the transformative power of truth and forgiveness. "My children," Pope Leo XIV said, his voice carrying the warmth of paternal affection, "what I have witnessed here today is the true foundation of Christian marriage, not perfection, but honesty, not the absence of sin, but the courage to confess it and seek redemption together. The congregation, which had sat in stunned silence throughout the dramatic revelations, began to stir with something approaching wonder. What had seemed like the destruction of a wedding had transformed into something far more profound, a demonstration of love's capacity to transcend even the deepest betrayals. Murmurs of amazement rippled through the pews as family members wiped away tears and exchanged glances of newfound respect for the couple before them. Marcus's mother, Elena, rose slowly from her seat, her face etched with both sorrow and pride. She approached the altar with hesitant steps, reaching out to embrace her son. "I never wanted your sacrifice," she whispered through her tears. "But I am proud of the man you've chosen to become. Are you ready to proceed?" Pope Leo XIV asked, looking between Marcus and Sophia. Not as two people hiding from their flaws, but as two souls committed to facing life's challenges with complete honesty. Sophia squeezed Marcus's hand tightly, her grip conveying a strength that surprised them both. "Yes, Your Holiness," she said, her voice clear and certain. "We've decided that we'll go to Syria together. I'm a nurse, and they need medical volunteers. As much as they need manuscript preservationists, we'll serve together as husband and wife." A collective exhale of relief and joy swept through the basilica. Marcus stared at Sophia in amazement, hardly able to believe that she would not only forgive him, but join him in his mission of atonement. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders for months seemed to lift, replaced by a profound sense of purpose and gratitude. Pope Leo XIV smiled, his weathered face radiating approval. "Then let us continue this sacred ceremony, blessed now by the truth that makes all love authentic. Cardinal Terretti, if you would." Cardinal Terretti, who had watched the entire drama unfold with growing amazement, stepped forward with his prayer book. His voice trembled slightly with emotion as he resumed the ceremony. The traditional words of the marriage liturgy seemed to carry new weight as they echoed through the ancient space, transformed by the honesty that had preceded them. When Marcus and Sophia exchanged their vows, the words seemed to flow from depths they hadn't known existed. Their promises to love in sickness and health for richer and poorer took on profound meaning for two people who had already faced the test of betrayal and forgiveness. The rings they placed on each other's fingers represented not just commitment, but the courage to build something beautiful from the ashes of deception. After the ceremony concluded and the newlyweds had signed the registry, Pope Leo XIV invited them to walk with him in the Vatican gardens. The late afternoon sun cast golden light through the ancient olive trees as the Holy Father shared his final wisdom with the couple who had taught him something about the power of redemptive love. Marriage built on truth may be more difficult, he told them as they strolled past fountains that had witnessed centuries of human drama, but it is also more enduring. What happened today in that basilica was not an interruption of your wedding, but its true beginning. You have learned that love without honesty is merely sentiment, but love with truth becomes a force capable of transforming both hearts and souls. 6 months later, Marcus and Sophia sent a letter from Syria, accompanied by photographs of the ancient monastery where they were working to preserve Christian manuscripts damaged by conflict. They wrote of the profound satisfaction they found in serving others and how their marriage, forged in the crucible of complete honesty, had become stronger than either had imagined possible. Pope Leo XIII kept their letter on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the Holy Spirit guides us to see what needs to be seen and say what needs to be said, transforming what appears to be destruction into the most beautiful form of redemption.